unless you in person visit that war zone, you're going to be very busy over the next few years.
I would like to look at the evidence. I think Susanna...
Wait a second. If you'll allow me to pursue this.
Yes, SNP MP John Nicolson, pursue away, with your amazing call-out on the Tories over Gaza. Now, I love watching John Nicolson in these culture, media and sports committee meetings, and on the 22nd of May 2024 was no exception, where they were scrutinising the work of the Secretary of State of the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, Lucy Frazer. Enjoy, my friends.
Secretary of State, you've mentioned a few times meetings that you've had with the BBC, and I'd like to pick up on some of the points that Mr. Brown has made earlier. And you said, I wrote down some of your quotes. You said that, Secretary of State, you've no right to interfere with the BBC on issues such as impartiality. I understand that before the acting chair of the BBC left, you had a meeting with her and the Director General, a number of other board members, just at the end of last year, to discuss finance and the settlement for the BBC licence fee and other matters. Can you just confirm what else you discussed at that meeting?
I'm sure there's a note of that meeting. I'm sure there's... We discussed a range of issues. It was open for any board members to raise any matters that they wanted to raise. I can't remember because I think it was about, months ago that we.
Perhaps I could remind you because
I can. Yeah, you remind.
I can remind you because I've been informed by some who were present about some of the discussion. They were very keen to talk to you about inflation-linked settlement. But I'm told that you kept returning to the issue of the BBC's coverage of the war in Gaza. Can you confirm that's the case?
We absolutely discussed that. So we have discussed that. So we had a meeting, and at the end of that meeting, I had previously said that in fact, what we discussed at that meeting is now coming back to me.
Good.
We discussed very clearly the position that the BBC did not refer to Hamas as terrorists. It was a matter that I had publicly called the BBC out on, I think the previous week, in a newspaper article, and I put points to the BBC in a private meeting about something I had already said publicly.
Well, of course, Hamas.
If I could just finish, John,
yeah.
About the reasons why I thought their guidance allowed them to refer to Hamas as terrorists, and I put forward a number of points as to why I thought it was open to them. And I had previously asked my officials whether it was appropriate to do that, and they said it was, and I had told the BBC that I might raise it at the meeting.
Okay, and of course it's self-evidently the case that Hamas are terrorists and revolting in every regard. However, I'm told by folk who were at the meeting that they were baffled by your response to their questions about funding and kept repeating your points about the coverage in Gaza. And they said that some people who were there said they couldn't get you off the subject of Gaza when they wanted to talk about funding.
So John, that's wholly incorrect. We had a meeting we had a board meeting which I was invited to, where we discussed whatever the BBC wanted to discuss, and it was open to them to raise anything, and we discussed the BBC at that meeting. At the end of the meeting, we had some moments to discuss.
Do you think it's appropriate for you to put pressure on the BBC over its journalism and its use of individual words?
I think the BBC made an error in not which I've been very public about, in its refusing to recognise the use of the term terrorists. I put forward my points, and Susanna was also meeting, so
we're agreed that Hamas are terrorists, but I'm a bit perplexed because, having agreed that, aren't you, when we're talking about Gaza, aren't you more shocked as a champion, I imagine, of independent journalism, that Israel has locked journalists out of Gaza in order to hide what it's doing in Gaza? And I've kind of searched, I can't find you on the record anywhere condemning Israel for locking journalists out of Gaza.
I made a number of speeches, John, and you're free to read them all, about how journalists are treated across the world.
Yeah, but in Gaza.
And including referring to the high number of deaths that have taken place in Israel and Gaza, and always happy to support journalists.
So just to get it on the record, you share my shock at the fact that Israel is locking journalists, including BBC journalists, out of Gaza.
I am very keen to go to Israel to understand.
No, that's. This is really a very simple question to answer. It's not a question of you having to be on the ground in Israel. You don't have to go to Israel to have a belief in the principle of independent journalism. You can't visit every country in the world to do an on-the-ground report as Secretary of State. This is a matter of principle. Does Israel have the right to lock journalists out of Gaza so that they're unable to report on the on-the-ground breaches of international law in Gaza? That's a question that you can answer in quite a straightforward fashion.
I like to look at evidence. And,
right. You can't get any evidence. If journalists are locked out of Gaza, you can't look at the evidence by definition. That is the point of journalism, to gather evidence. You can't see the evidence because journalists are locked out of Gaza.
Very clear in my engagements with news operators and in a number of speeches that I've made about the importance of the freedom to report, the difficulty in reporting in war zones. And I'm very keen, John, to ensure that wherever people are in the world, that they have the freedom to report, and I will always stand up.
You're constructing a variety of Secretary of State. You're
for
conducting
those who are unable to do that.
Yes, you're constructing a variety of sentences to avoid saying something.
Because I would like to, if you're putting something to me,
yes,
it's my job to assess the evidence. That is not a matter on which I have assessed the evidence, but I would be very interested to do so.
So for example, you would have to go to Ukraine, would you, and the occupied areas of Ukraine, before you could express a view on Putin and whether it's right or wrong for him to lock journalists. So you cannot express a view on any war zone unless you in person visit that war zone. You're going to be very busy over the next few years.
I absolutely haven't said that, and you are misconstruing what I said. I said I'm particularly interested in what's happening in Israel and Gaza in relation to journalists.
We all are.
And that is why a number of months ago I asked the Foreign Office if I could go to Israel in order to go. And I also asked to go to Ukraine as well. Unfortunately, neither of those trips have transpired. But I asked again. I'd just like to finish. I asked again last week because I am very interested in the high number of deaths in the region and in relation to journalists.
Yes,
so I asked my department again, in fact, last week, if it was possible for me to go, because I'm very interested in ensuring that journalists have the freedom to report.
Yes, well, they don't. And they don't. And the committee will note that you've been given more than 5 minutes to express a view on whether Israel should lock journalists out of Gaza, and you're choosing not to answer that question.
If that is the case, it is wrong, but I would like to look at the evidence. I think Susanna...
wait a second. If you'll allow me to pursue this, Permanent Secretary. If that is the case, are you saying that all these months into this war, and you don't know definitively whether journalists are locked out? It's not a question of if it's the case. You only have to talk to the BBC at one of your meetings with them, and the BBC Middle East editor will confirm with you that it is the case the BBC are locked out. So it's not a question of if.
Wasn't he brilliant? Also, that's not the end for these two this week, so look out for part 2. And that's why I have a lot of time for John Nicolson and a number of other SNP MPs. He just made her look like an incompetent, bumbling idiot, didn't he? Now I have a question for you to answer down below. Do you think that she believed any of that nonsense she spouted about not seeing any evidence? Or is she just playing the get out of jail free card of just plain dumb? Either way, she's wholly unfit to be anywhere near the corridors of power in my eyes. Also, something else sprang to mind while watching this was going on. It's obviously going to be Labour government after July the 5th, isn't it? Now, if the Labour minister think they're going to get away with that line of bollocks, they can think again. But let me know down below your thoughts, and I shall just bid you farewell and take care, my friends.